Hello everyone, welcome back to another one of John's never-ending list of random things to do. For today's video, I will be showing you how to reseal a power steering pump for a Mark II Celica Supra. To begin, you want to clamp it down on a vise, but don't clamp it too tight. Then go ahead and make sure it's secured. Next, we'll want to remove these 14mm bolts. In this video, 2 of them had already been removed. Now with the 4 14mm bolts removed, grip the front piece of the housing and wiggle it out. Now you want to remember there's a circle dot right here. It's facing towards the back side of the power steering pump. We'll be working on the front portion of the power steering pump first. Go ahead and remove the first rubber seal. Next, we'll go ahead and slide this piece off. Now you'll want to remember how you took it off. If you look at this piece carefully, there's a little diamond shape etched in here. It was originally facing the back side of the power steering pump. Now you want to be extra careful to not lose any of these shims or let them slide out. If any of them do fall out, one side is rounded and one side is flat. The flat side is facing inward and the rounded side is facing outward. Now do your best to remove this piece without losing any of the shims. Then place it somewhere safe. Next, we'll take the front housing and clamp it down on the vise. As a reminder, don't clamp it down too tight, just enough so it doesn't move. Now using a flathead screwdriver, I'm going to tap it into the seal. You'll want to hit your tool in at an angle. This will help prevent scratches on the inside of the housing. Hopefully at some point your tool penetrates the seal. From there, carefully pry off the seal. Now using a retainer ring plier, you'll want to remove this retainer in here. After removing the retainer, you can place the front housing on the vise like so. Then using a plastic or rubber mallet, just slightly tap on this shaft. It should start moving with little to no effort. If you wanted to, you could just hold the front housing and lightly tap out the shaft. Now it's time to inspect this piece. Go ahead and spin your bearing to see if it's making noise, and go ahead and wobble it back and forth to see if it has too much play. If your bearing is bad or has to be replaced, you'll have to remove this retainer located here, so you can remove and replace the bearing. Now before reassembling the front housing, it's probably best to clean all the parts. There we go, that's looking much better. Now you want to have at least a quart of Dextron automatic transmission fluid available, so we can pre-lube these parts for the reassembly. Now with the parts pre-lubed, go ahead and insert the shaft. Then using your plastic or rubber mallet, lightly tap it into place. Now place the front housing back onto your vise and reinstall the retainer clip. And this is the sealing kit I purchased from my local AutoZone. I'll go ahead and leave a link to this item in the video description below. You'll also want to have some multi-purpose grease available, so you can pre-lube this seal. You'll want to apply some grease on the outside and some on the inside. This is to prevent premature tear while installing the seal. Now go ahead and align the seal. If you have a big enough socket, you can just place it over the seal and smack it into place. But if you don't, you'll be using my method, where you tap on one side and then on the other side, and just work your way around until the seal falls into place. Now with the seal in place, go ahead and flip the front housing over, so you can reinstall this piece. Now before reinstalling it, let's go ahead and pre-lube it with some fresh fluids. And you'll want to make sure it gets into the shims. Now remember, this dot was facing towards the back side of the housing. Now with that said, go ahead and slide it into the splines. Next, you'll want to apply this O-ring. If you're wondering which O-ring this is, it's the biggest one in the kit. Now before reinstalling it, you should have pre-lubed it. And the gasket should be easy to install with little to no effort. Finally, install this last piece to the front housing. You want to remember, this diamond is facing towards the back side of the housing. And with this, the front housing of the power steering pump is done. Now we're moving on to the back side of the power steering pump. You want to flip it over like so, and using a mallet or a plastic hammer, you'll want to tap on it until you hear a metal clink. This here is the piece that was just tapped out. I went on ahead and cleaned the part, so it's much easier to handle. Now using a very small flat head, you want to remove this O-ring. This O-ring, like the other O-rings you'll see in this video, were hard and brittle, so you'll want to do your best to not scratch any of the surfaces. Now, the next O-ring to remove is in here. This O-ring was a little bit more difficult to remove. As I was removing some pieces, the O-ring was breaking apart, so it came out in 3 pieces. Now it's time to reinstall the O-ring. Go ahead and pre-lube it first and reinstall it. This is the second biggest O-ring in the kit. It should be easily installed with little to no effort. Up next we have the inner O-ring. To install it, you want to squeeze the O-ring just a bit, insert one edge into the lip, and then force the rest of the O-ring back into its location. Before installing it, let's go ahead and apply some fluid on here. Next you want to line these 2 holes with these 2 shafts. Then go ahead and insert the piece. Next you have a spring. It just sits right here. And we'll follow that with the back side of the power steering pump housing. Before installing it, you want to make sure this surface is clean. Now go ahead and place the back housing down here like so. Work it down slowly and make sure it aligns with the front housing. Once you have it aligned, go ahead and compress the 2 pieces together. Now would be a good time to reinstall the 4 14mm bolts. Tighten the 4 housing bolts evenly in 3 or 4 passes, with the last pass being 34 foot-pound. Alright, the power steering pump is now back together. But we're not done yet, there's a few more O-rings to be replaced. You want to clamp the power steering pump like so. Then using a 27mm socket and a breaker bar, break this piece loose, then remove it completely. From here, you have to remove this O-ring. And on this piece here, the O-ring is located here. Go ahead and remove it and do your best to not scratch any surface. From our seal kit, we will be using these 2 O-rings. Now go ahead and pre-lube the O-ring, then install it. This was probably the most difficult O-ring to install, but with time and some patience, it'll go right in. Here we're pre-lubing the other O-ring. Then it just sits up here. Now this piece can be inserted and threaded in all the way by hand. Last of all for this section, torque it down to 51 foot-pound. Alright, we're almost done. There's one more O-ring to replace, and it's located in here. Now go ahead and place your power steering pump in a vise like so. Then find yourself a 10mm bolt. These are the 10mm bolts you find all over the car. Now using your tool, compress the snap ring. Then using your finger or a screwdriver, press the valve in. You need to press the valve in, otherwise the snap ring will not come out. Now using your 10mm bolt, thread it into the back side of the valve, then carefully pull it out, place it to the side, pull out the spring, then place the spring somewhere safe. Now our last and final O-ring is located here. Go ahead and do your best to remove it. From the seal kit, it's one of these O-rings. You should have one of the exact same O-ring left over, and that's meant for your reservoir. Alright, we're down to the last stretch, so let's go ahead and pre-lube this O-ring, then install it here like so. Insert the spring, insert the valve with this point on the spring, and try to press the valve in as much as you can. Now, to reinstall the retainer, you'll probably want to use a screwdriver or some tool to press the valve down just a bit. This will help you find the location where the retainer belongs. Once you've found the location, remove your screwdriver, then fix your retainer so it sits in properly. If you found the valve didn't spring load back to its normal resting location, go ahead and thread in your 10mm bolt and pull it back up. And that's all there is to resealing your power steering pump. Now let's go ahead and install it and see if it leaks. I was lucky enough to find someone local who had a leaking power steering pump, so we went on ahead and replaced his power steering pump. And here's the results, completely dry. I hope some of you found this video helpful. If you did and you liked it, help me with those thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed yet, consider subscribing. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys for the next random project.